Hello everyone, and welcome to the return of SKULLTRAIL series, episode 4. In the previous episode I bought the wrong coolers, but at least did manage to boot the system up to see if everything works, which it luckily did. And in this episode we're going to get the right coolers and to see if we can actually boot it into Windows and do some benchmarks and maybe a game or two. So the cooler I did buy now is the Untitled 4, which does feature a backplate which clears the components on the back side of the motherboard. I'm not quite sure why other manufacturers would use the backplate from the Cooler Master, which I did have, as this is clearly a superior design. Perhaps cost cutting, most likely cost cutting. The installation of this cooler was quite straightforward. A couple of components you need to install on the cooler itself, and then these little tiny rubber grommets, I think they're called. You need to put them on the motherboard to provide a bit of insulation when you put the screw through them and tighten the nuts, as you'll see in a minute. So now I'm putting the backplate in place. First I just take the backplate and put some screws already in it. It is a bit tricky to get it right, as you need to balance the motherboard over something so you have some space to put the backplate on the back, but also you need to keep it in place and put the screws through it and then install the nuts. So it is a bit tricky, but if you take your time and perhaps put something on the motherboard so it doesn't fall off. In my case it was heavy enough, but it is a bit tricky, but it can certainly be done. Next up, I just removed the old thermal paste, which was still there from when I first booted the system, but since I'm now trying to more permanently install these coolers, I figured I might as well just put some fresh paste in place using my Noctua NTH1. Next up, it was just a matter of bolting the cooler down, putting it in nice and straight, just applying some pressure to spread the thermal paste around, and then using the included screws with the springs, and then trying to screw it down in a cross pattern to evenly distribute the force, again for a more even thermal paste application. This was also fairly simple to do. You could tie the screws down with your fingers also, as they have quite nice grip, but I just opted to use a screwdriver here. And here we go, the first cooler is in place, and the nice thing about it is that it clears the RAM, it clears the north bridge. There's even enough space for a little fan on the north bridge, which I am planning to install, but this Untitled 4 is the perfect cooler I was looking for this build, so that's very nice. If you want to see the installation of the second cooler, you can keep watching now or skip ahead almost exactly 3 minutes. And here we are with also the second cooler installed, and the clearances are still okay, nothing is touching, still plenty of space for the north bridge and the RAM, and everything is looking quite great. I really like the aesthetic of these coolers. I think quite sleek looking, not too large, and still see the motherboard, and hopefully they'll do a fine job cooling. Next up for me it was to get everything back together and install Windows. I started out with Windows 7 Professional. It is important to note that if you are installing Windows on a dual socket motherboard, you are going to be needing the Pro version, as Home only can only utilize one socket, doesn't support two. And here you see you have two processors, recognizing correctly in Windows, opening the taskbar just to verify that there are indeed 8 cores running, and there are indeed. However, when I started to dig a little deeper, I ran across a little issue here, and that is that the temperatures using hardware, I think it was hardware info, aren't really correct at all. In fact, very incorrect. So this is far below ambient temperature, so we would be these CPUs would have defeated the laws of physics in order to run that cool, and I do believe they aren't. So the first thing I wanted to try is to see if switching the CPUs around would make any difference. Perhaps there's some kind of bug somewhere, I supposed. So it is at least worth a try, and I've got much experience with these coolers now, so getting them in and out was very short work. After doing so, I first decided to just jump into the BIOS, because there is a monitoring tab, and see what those temperatures have to say. And in here it looks quite fine. We have a very nice thermal margin on both processors, and also the area temps don't seem to be very out of the ordinary. So in here everything seems to be fine. Just to check, I also upgraded to Windows 10 just to make sure that there was no issue with that. Maybe Windows 7 was acting up strangely, and I had a key lying around, so Windows 10 it is. Everything seems to be displayed correctly here. I believe I also just put up the task manager here. I also, it's worth mentioning, I installed it on an old hard drive, so Windows 10 isn't exactly the snappiest on a hard drive. But in any case, 8 threads in here also. So I then went ahead and installed various temperature monitoring programs, and what really baffles me is that every single program I've installed are monitoring different temperatures for the processors. So I have core temp, I have speed fan, hardware info, and some others, and all are reporting different temperatures. So I thought maybe it's something with the offset, but then perhaps the temperatures have to be reported the same across all these applications. So for now I just leave this as it is, and mostly because when I actually touch the physical coolers, they're not very warm to the touch at all. Some applications are reporting high temperatures, but the coolers itself are cold, so it absolutely baffles me. As I don't believe the CPUs are actually overheating, I'll just leave these problems for now and moving on. We can see that both CPUs are running at their stock clock speeds at a quite conservative 1.25 volts, and of course we can go play with these settings in the BIOS later, which I will certainly do. The RAM is at 55515, 666 MHz, and to put this to the test, I'm going to run, of course, Cinebench at absolute stock speeds. This is actually sped up a bit, but just to give you an idea that it was actually running it. we scored 671 points, which as of now is about equal to a 3770, but of course with overclocking I do expect to at least surpass the 4770, maybe even a bit higher. But in the next video I do want to focus on overclocking both the CPUs and the RAM, tightening up the timings a bit, to see just how far we can safely push these CPUs. And I'm, as I said, hoping for somewhere in the region of 830 to 850 points. That would be really nice, and that is the whole reason why you'd want to have bought this board and these CPUs in 2008 to begin with, for the overclocking. And as a final demonstration, I have here installed and running the one and only Grand Theft Auto 4. In the top left corner you can see the MSI Afterburner overlay showing all 8 threads being utilized quite nicely. The game is still running, not exactly as I wanted to, but still got some tweaking to do. This is Grand Theft Auto 4 Troll. This is just a demonstration as well. And well, that was all for this video. If you have a comment or a question or suggestion, please do leave it. And if you want to be kept up to date, please consider subscribing, as in the next video I will be covering overclocking. And I thank you all for watching.